It's 12:02, so I think we'll start doing the introduction work here and get started here in the next few minutes. Welcome everybody to Woodland Wildlife Wednesdays, our monthly webinar about all things wildlife, woodlands in Maryland and beyond. My name is Luke McCauley. I'm the host for today. Want to start out and just do some housekeeping items. Let everybody know the webinar is being recorded. We will post the recording later on our website at extension.umd.edu/woodland. So you can, if you missed anything or want to have to jump off early, you can always go watch it there. If you registered for our webinar, you get subscribed to our free quarterly newsletter and a notice of our upcoming events. If you'd like to opt out, just email Pam Thomas at pthomas@umd.edu with the message "no events." If you have any questions or comments, we welcome them. Please do, you can pop them into the chat at the bottom of your screen. There should be a little control button and here's a picture of what that looks like. And you click that button and you can type your question or comment into the box, and Bud will take some of those questions at the end. We'll also take a brief survey at the end of the presentation to see how you liked it. So, oh, sorry, jumped ahead too far. Today we are, I'm pleased to introduce Bud Reaves. He's going to speak about invasive species and the effects on woodlands and wildlife here in Maryland. His talk is titled "Weed Warriors," which I can understand. It is sometimes a battle to keep some of these weeds out of the woodlands. And here's a picture of Mr. Reaves. Bud Reaves, he's a county forester with the Arundel County Department of Inspections and Permits. His email, if you'd like to reach him afterwards, is budreaves@gmail.com. And before we get started, we'd like to take a moment and ask people where they're calling in from or dialing in from. So you should have a little poll pop up on your screen right now, and you can type in what part of Maryland or outside of Maryland do you live, and close this out. And with that, I will say, if you have any questions or have any ideas for talks you'd like to hear in the future and different months, please do share those ideas to my email, lukemac@umd.edu, lukemac@umd.edu. Love to hear thoughts and ideas. We're looking for speakers for next year, so want to make sure we get folks that are addressing questions you have with wildlife and woodlands. So I will stop sharing now and allow Bud to take on to go ahead and share his screen and start his presentation for everybody.
Hi everybody. Again, I'm Bud Reaves. I'm a forester. We're presently for Anne County's Department of Inspections and Permits. Do all kinds of things for them. But I've been a forester for 37 years now. And about 25 years ago, kind of got introduced to invasive species management by accident. I had a landowner who was overrun by Japanese honeysuckle, and ever since then it's been part of my it's been in my wheelhouse of how to manage things. And let me tell you a little bit about, Luke mentioned weed warriors. One of the things I got tasked with a few years ago was, and I won't go too much in this, was putting together a weed warrior program. And several other counties have a weed warrior program, and Lions for Chesapeake Bay, the Chesapeake Bay Trust, a few other nonprofits, and a bunch of other groups that said, "Bud, we need a program." So okay. So I put one together. And we call ourselves the Anne Arundel Reed Resistance, just to be different. What the aim of the these volunteer programs are is to help the forest. The forests, and especially the East Coast, but all across the country, really are being attacked by invasive species, and they're causing harm in several ways, and some specifically the wildlife, some specifically the trees, but overall they're a bad actor, if you will. And here's our mission: empower and enable individuals to groups within the county to help positive influence on the health and sustainability of the forest and natural areas in their communities. And that's basically it. There we go. What we do is we train we train the volunteers, teach them plant ID skills. You need to know how what to ID. Train them on the ecology of the plants. What are the best methods to control them, and just safety things like tool use, how to report with your activities, and just outdoor safety like ticks. And we develop events, but after a while we have leaders that start their own events. And we teach them event planning, basic first aid, and we have a coordinator that that helps run this program. And one of the things we do is we want to plant after we clear the invasives. You want to plant trees because nature abhors a vacuum, and if you clear invasives out and don't plant something back, chances are you're going to get more invasives back. So you just back to square one. Okay. And this is kind of one of our training videos in general. And one of the things you have to understand when you're working with invasive plants is how they grow, what their characteristics are, and what you can do to interrupt that process. Invasive plants, they tend to be plants that adapt to disturbance very easily. And that's why you find them by roadsides, cleared land, open areas that have lots of light. A lot of them are shade intolerant, and they like to have light. If you give them that opportunity, they'll start growing. We also have, besides light, you also have a tolerance for environmental conditions that a lot of native plants won't be able to adapt to. You have a high or low pH, temperature, moisture regimes, light levels, oxygen levels, and nutrient availability, like poor soils, or example, they'll do well because they can tolerate that. Invasive plants produce copious amounts of seeds. That's part of their method of reproduction, is to overwhelm the environment with seeds and hope something will take root. We'll talk a little bit later about what some of the other consequences of this, of seed banks. They produce large amounts of seeds on a regular basis. A lot of plants are kind of spotty when it comes to seed production. The seeds take a lot of energy to produce, and if the conditions aren't right, they won't produce as many seeds. But invasive plants, they tend to just do it every year. They also have a high germination rate. So if they produce seeds, they get a little bit of a finger hold, they're gonna sprout and start growing. And also, a lot of native invasive plants are able to spread vegetatively. A lot of the plants that grow by means of rhizomes, which are underground roots or underground stems that not only store food and whatnot, but they also have buds on them that will, if you cut them, they'll come right up. Good example of that is Japanese knotweed, and also a lot of your thistles. You cut a thistle, it's gonna come back worse. But the main reason probably that they're so successful as invasive plants is because they're non-native. They don't have the biological controls that native plants have. A lot of insects that would feed on a native plant won't feed on invasive plants. That's also true of like animals too, like deer. White-tailed deer, which is a big problem around here also, but it's a native problem, so it's we have to treat it differently. But over time in their ecology, they didn't grow up with these plants. They're not used to eating them. So a lot of times they'll just ignore them unless there's absolutely nothing else to eat, which happens sometimes. But mostly they ignore them and will let the non-native plants flourish. Plus, there's no diseases or parasites that are native to the area that will prey on these plants. And some facts, and this is probably, the numbers are probably low now. Since European settlement of America, there have been 50,000 species of plants been introduced, and about 5,000 have gone wild. And these are competing with about 17,000 plus natives. I'll get a little terminology. A native species, this is a plant that naturally occurs in nature. Kind of simple, but we're talking plants that grew up in this, that evolved in this area, and have been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years, or even more. And they have grown up in competition with the other native plants, so they've kind of developed their own niches. Non-native species, on the other hand, are either from another geographic region. You know, if you have a plant from California, it might do better here than it would be in California, vice versa. And that happens with several species. But most of the time, we're talking about plants that are brought in from another country, either another continent, or from another part of this continent. You know, the plants from Mexico, Central America, and even Canada. But as I said before, there's 50,000 introduced and only 5,000 are causing problems. So non-native species are not necessarily a bad plant. It's only when they're invasive, that's when it become a problem. And non-native plants that want to aggressively colonize other ecosystems, those are invasive species. And we'll be identifying some of these here in a minute. And of course, what's the weed? That's a plant growing in the wrong place. And how you determine a weed from a desirable plant is to pull on it. And if it comes out, it's probably a good plant. So And here's some more terminology. Annuals, they complete their life cycle in a year. Biennials have a 2-year biological cycle. Perennials have an enduring or continually recurring life cycle where they produce seed, go dormant, then resprout again. Herbaceous plants or plants that are related to a herb or a forb, and deciduous plants or plants that shed their leaves annually. And evergreens are ones that retain your green leaves throughout the year, even though they do shed needles. Okay, some of our impacts. Most of these invasive plants will outcompete native species. They grow faster and shade out other native species or shade out native species. They dominate an area, and we're not just talking up above ground, but also below ground too. They have aggressive root systems. They can crowd out the roots of other plants. And they're degrading, by their presence, they're degrading habitat quality and quantity just by their presence. We'll get into that a little bit here. And because of this competition, they're reducing biodiversity. Good example is pollinator habitat. You know, a lot of the invasive plants will outcompete, you know, the wildflowers and other plants that pollinators depend on, and they're left with nothing but poor choices to get nectar or pollen from. And there's also a dollar cost associated with this. There's approximately $140 billion are spent every year, and that's probably going up recently. It's probably from a couple of years ago, on controlling invasive plants. This is on private and public land, all across the country, all across the world. Invasive plants are a problem in other countries as well. They also have the possibility of spreading diseases and pests. Some of the crop species, which are themselves non-native, like wheat and barley and whatnot, they brought their diseases with them, so they're causing a problem. We also have invasive diseases and pests that are spreading around and causing harm to, especially the forest land. We'll get some of those in a minute here. Whoops. Now, sometimes they can change the hydrology, but some of them can change soil chemistry. We'll talk about garlic mustard here in a little bit, and that's one that has a pretty insidious way of suppressing other plants. The altered natural succession by excluding the natural plants and regeneration. They impede recreational activities, and in some cases they impact the fire susceptibility. There's a grass called Kudzu grass that is fairly entrenched down south, and it grows so thick that it, when it dries out, it catches fire. What used to be a ground fire then turns into a crown fire and destroys the trees. And it's very hard as a very difficult species to control. Okay. Now this here is all leaf, identification stuff, and I won't go into this much because that's a whole class in itself. We will talk about monocots and dicots and angiosperms, so we'll define these. Monocots are your plants like your grasses, sedges, rushes. These are, and bamboos. Bamboo is considered a grass. It's also very invasive. They have a different growth habit than your broadleaf plants, with your dicots. Monocots grow from the ground, and that's where they grow from. Dicots tend to grow from buds above ground. There's two broad categories of plants. There's angiosperms, so those are plants that flower and produce fruits, and gymnosperms, which are plants that produce seed without a fruit. And your gymnosperms tend to be evergreens, like your pines and spruces and whatnot, but not always. There are some gymnosperms that are produce that don't produce fruit. Okay. And then to find our plants, a tree is a woody plant that's over 20 foot tall. It could be multi-stem, well, most times a single stem. Shrubs are woody plants that grow up to 20 feet tall, and they're more often than not multi-stemmed. And again, a herbaceous plant or plants that don't produce wood, essentially. Except for bamboo. Bamboo produces a type of wood. And also, and most importantly, there are vines. Vines can be woody or herbaceous, but the bad actors tend to be the woody ones. And they're the ones that grow longitudinally more than they grow horizontally. You know, they grow long wise as opposed to growing wide, because their growth habit is to get up into the light as fast as possible. Let's get into the species. I want to skip ahead here and get to these, so I have time for questions at the end. English ivy. I think everybody's seen English ivy. English ivy was probably brought along from colonists from Great Britain and Europe, and some places that it might behave itself, but around here it gets out of hand real quick. It's a evergreen plant, has very waxy cuticle on the top of leaves. The bottom is all stomates. That's where the respiration occurs. But it's a vine that's tight, and here's a bad example itself. It grows up in the trees or any other vertical surface, be it a building, a post, but it's particularly pernicious on trees because it covers them up, adds weight to it, and it can actually bring the tree down from their weight. English ivy it can be controlled fairly easily by just mechanically treating it. You can cut the stem at the bottom, and reach up as far as you can and cut above overhead and remove those vines from the tree. But leave the rest of the stuff is up in the tree sitting there. Once you cut it at the bottom, there's no way for it to transport water. It'll dry out and die. It'll take a month, maybe two, for that to happen, but it'll eventually happen. And then you just let it fall out of the tree. It's generally not a good idea to try to pull it out of the tree, especially when it's green, because you're going to harm the bark, because it's pretty connected to the bark, or you might pull a dead branch down on yourself. But you also want to clear it away from the base of the tree by about 3 to 5 feet, maybe 6 feet, to prevent it from growing up again. Now, if it's on the ground, sometimes you can roll it up or just pull it up. But if you just keep it off the trees, that'll help the trees out. Now, another interesting thing about English ivy is it doesn't flower when it's growing horizontally. Once it starts growing up the tree, that's when it starts producing flowers and producing fruit, and that's when the birds get to it and start spreading around. Now, English ivy, and I'll talk about this a little bit. English ivy in Maryland was called a tier 2 plant. And what that means is it has been assessed by rigorous weed risk assessment protocol, and it's found to be, even though it's very destructive and very widespread, you can still buy it in nurseries. Nurseries are still allowed to sell it. However, it has to be labeled as such, as a tier 2 plant, and it has to suggest to the buyer or consumer that there are alternatives. There are alternatives like partridge pea and a few other things that'll work better. The designation of the tier 2 plant doesn't mean it's not a problem. It just means basically that it's so widespread that prohibited sale won't materially stop the spread any. And that's true of a couple other plants too. We'll talk about those. So if you see this in a nursery, just don't buy it. But make sure it's got a sign on it, or yellow and about half the size of a 8.5 by 11 page. If you have any questions at the end about this, I'll be glad to answer them. Okay. Next bad actor we have around here is Bradford Pear. Bradford Pear was developed about 40, 50 years ago as it was considered to be the perfect urban tree. Had pretty flowers, had a nice globe-shaped form. But it was also supposed to be sterile. Well, that didn't work. Bradford Pear had flowers, and it would it was crossbreeding with the native pear, and it forms these little these round pears here like that, which the birds love and are spreading all over the place. Here's a typical infestation. You see these in the spring, all up and down 97 and Route 50 and all your major highways, and they're crowding out the other desirable trees. They're very hard to kill. They sprout vigorously when they're cut, and they cause a lot of problems. This is another tree you don't want to plant because they have poor form and they start falling apart after about 20 years. But just the fact that they're invasive like that is reason enough not to plant them. Now, another one we have here is kudzu, the vine that ate the South. Curia montana thing. And kudzu was a vine that was brought in as a miracle cure for erosion and all kinds of other things back in the turn of the 18th century. And it was highly promoted in the early part of last century. I used to have kudzu fairs, and they elect kudzu queen. and people are trying to make potions out of them, all kinds of stuff. They thought it was a miracle plant. Well, they found out different. You can see here, kudzu, which can grow 30 feet in a year, will cover anything that stands still, and that includes trees. It's a very tough woody vine, and it's very hard to control. People try to use goats on them, but the goats only eat the leaves and don't eat the vine because the vines are so even too tough for goats. And so what you have is these areas that are like a mess. Now, the only sure way to get rid of a kudzu problem is this. Sell the property, move away. Otherwise, you have yourself a fight in your hands. If you had this much kudzu, you'd be tackling that for a long time. Kudzu requires chemicals to kill the culms or the vines themselves, and a lot of work. If you have a kudzu problem on your property or property you manage or aware of, contact professionals. Contact a forester. Contact your soil conservation district. Get help, because this is a serious plant to deal with, and if you don't do it right, you just be spinning your wheels and not really won't be able to make any progress with that. Okay. Okay, another one is a Norway Maple. Nori Maple is a tree from Europe, obviously called Norway. It's really popular around here as a ornamental, as a street tree and a landscape tree. Produces pretty good shade and does it in a fairly short amount of time. But it also produces a lot of samaras or seeds, and will really sprout and invade woodlands. Nori Maple is extremely shade tolerant, and is very similar in growth habit to the native sugar maple. But also outcompetes native red maple around here on the coastal plain and the silver maple. And it grows so dense that it shades out all the understory now, and all the regeneration from below. Now, how you can idea Nori Maple is you can break a leaf off or a twig, and the sap will come out. It'll be a milky color. Also have very stout twigs and very prominent terminal buds. Now, next one, and you've probably seen this, is garlic mustard. Garlic mustard is a biennial. We said before, biennial plants take 2 years for them to develop. The first year they have what's called a rosette stage, which is what you see here. Kind of looks like Creeping Charlie somewhat, but it's going to be larger. They're about 2 or 3 inches across usually. And then the next year it flowers. And notice the difference in the leaf. See how round that leaf is? And this leaf here is more like shaped like a maple, has a very prominent central lobe here on the end, with its very pointy apex. Once into the second stage, this is when it flowers. It'll then set seed, and then it'll die and release the seed. At this point here, especially when it's in flower, it's a good time to control it because it'll come right out of the ground easily. Just tug on it, it'll come right out. And if you do it before it sets seed, you don't have to worry about the seeds themselves. But if it's after the seeds, and I'll show you the seed stage. Here's the seed stage. And these little stalks here all have seeds on them. When this happens, and you pull them out, you want to bag them up in a plastic bag and throw them away. You don't want to throw them on the ground. In this stage here, when it's in flower and hasn't set seed, all you have to do is just set them somewhere, let them dry out and die. Then you can compost them or just let them decay on the ground. But if there's seeds there, you don't want to try to compost them. That'll contaminate your compost, and you spread them that way. This all happens pretty quick. It happens. It'll start flowering in April and May, and by June, it'll be setting seeds, and by July, it'll start to dry up and die. So you pretty much have this kind of a spring activity to pull garlic mustard. Now, that being said, there are some uses. A friend of mine made pesto out of it. Because it was brought over here as an herb as a seasoning, because it is, by its name, garlic mustard does have a garlic smell to it, and you can use it to flavor foods. But the insidious part of this is not the fact that it'll spread and crowd out other plants, but garlic mustard is a allopath. Allopathic plants are plants that produce chemicals, exude chemicals from the roots that suppress other plants. And how this one works is it produces a chemical that kills the mycorrhizal fungi that woody plants depend on. Plants like trees and shrubs have a relationship with a fungus that's in the soil that helps them grow. It's a mutual relationship, and it expands their ability to uptake water and nutrients. And the fungi gets nutrients from the tree or shrub. But garlic mustard kills that and suppresses regeneration that way, which is kind of sneaky. That's why it's a good reason to try to suppress this as much as you can. Okay. Next is mile a minute. Maybe you've seen this. Mile a minute is also called tear thumb. You can see it. There's little tiny thorns on the thing. By its name implies, grows very fast, and it'll cover up plants and shade them out. And it's not a heavy plant like the other vines are, but it will outcompete and cover up plants and keep them from absorbing sunshine. This also has seeds, and this persists for 3 years, means it should be changed to 7. It produces a lot of seeds, like most invasives are, but it's also it's an annual. This grows 1 year, it grows with seed, grows all summer, sets seed, then dies in the fall. If you can get to it before it sets seed, you can just pull this up or mow it. If you find in the lawn or in a ground cover situation, you can just mow it and get rid of it pretty easily. However, you have to be advised that there's a seed bank in there, and you might have to do this for several years, and up to 7. 3 years is probably average. You might have to keep mowing that or pulling that for 7 years before you get a handle on it. Okay. Now, invasive species. We have some new species out here. One's wavy-leaf basket grass, was I'm seeing pretty much starting to see everywhere. And a few that are here, the beach vitex. We don't have to worry about that because that's along the Atlantic coast. But here's a cooking grass I'll tell you about it changes the fire regime. Now, wavy-leaf basket grass was first discovered. You can see the weight. See how the leaves are wavy looking. Was first found in Tapsco Valley State Park in 1996 in the United States. This was the first place it was noticed. It was just in a few patches like that. You can see the patches there, a patch here, and a patch there outlined yellow. But 9 years later, or 10 years later, it's spread all over the place. Wavy-leaf basket grass is very similar to Japanese stilt grass, and it just covers the ground and suppresses herbaceous growth and also woody growth too by shading things out. This could be found everywhere, and it also produces very sticky seeds that will stick to anything, your boots, your pants, dogs, anything. So it's being spread around by that. The only way to really control this is to mow it in the summertime before it sets seed, or use a herbicide application. If you haven't seen this yet, you will. You probably haven't noticed it, but you will be seeing it. I want to leave time for questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bud.
Yeah.
I appreciate learning about all those. We do have some things coming in on the chat. Let me pull this up real quick. We had a comment from Amy when you were talking about kudzu. Maybe the best thing to do with it is just sell the property if you've got kudzu on it. She says kudzu is rough.
Yes. Yeah.
So Raymond Eckhart shared some information saying he saw some recent research from Cornell on garlic mustard and said the best way to manage it is to do nothing. It has various links about it, and he was curious if you heard about it or if there are any plans to duplicate the research. In the press release, it says, he has a snippet in there, suppressing garlic mustard may be a desired management outcome, and a new study suggests that all it may take is patience. Active management interference may not be necessary and even counterproductive, as research document widespread garlic mustard population declines with residence time. Huh.
That's interesting. I've heard a rumor that, but it never saw a link to where I could read about it. I will look at that.
And
that would be good. We can take away one plant we don't have to worry about, that'd be fine with me.
Right. We have two people, Dan Singleton and Bill Tate, both were interested in Japanese stilt grass. I think that Bill Tate mentions stilt weed control, and I think he probably means Japanese stilt grass as well. You want to touch on that one, because I know that's dominant in my area.
Yes, stilt grass is kind of like the wavy leaf basket grass, but more widespread than that now. The best way to get rid of one thing I remember about invasive species is eradication is rarely possible unless there's a brand new population. Like if you find on your property is a small, you might be able to eradicate your property, but overall, trying to eradicate a species like that is kind of a I don't want to say hopeless, but it'll be challenging to say the least. So best thing you can do is control it, and controlling the stilt grass is like the basket grass has to do with this with the life cycle, because it'll start growing in the spring, it'll flower, then set seed, then it'll die. It's an annual grass, and the key there is getting to it before it sets seed. And you can either mow it if you have a ability to mow it, or if you can hit it with a light solution of glyphosate or grass killer. There's some grass specific herbicides that work pretty well, or glyphosate or Roundup, or that's a bad word these days. But the key is to get to it before it sets seed. Once it sets seeds, you're pretty much done for the year, because it's going to die, and trying to kill it then it won't make any impact. But it does have a long term seed bank of at least 7 years, and sometimes longer. So if you have it, just realize you got a hobby for the next 7 or 8 years of mowing it or spraying it, trying to get it under control. And eventually, if you keep at it and really diligent about it, you can exercise some sort of control.
I have a follow-up. I've been doing exactly that, and I have read that and seen. Well, I'm curious if you know, once you see the first few seed heads come out on those, and those seeds are still green, are they viable if once they've emerged from that sheath of the leaf? Are those seeds viable at that point, and you're kind of your best to either pull those out or mow it very, very soon, like immediately at that point? Or
yeah, well, once they're formed, they develop at that point. So if you cut them at that point, they'll still develop. They don't have, and I don't think they have to be attached to the plant in order to develop.
Oh, interesting. Right.
So if you see the seeds, even if they're green, I would think you're probably done for the year.
Right. Or I try and time it as soon as I see the first ones and I hit it real close, because I've also had it regrow if I mow too early, or even when I mow at that point, I will have some still flush up in the next few weeks and try and put some more seeds out.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's pernicious to say the least.
Yeah. All right, we have some other more good questions. Raymond, we're getting back to you on, well, since we're on the topic of Japanese stilt grass, I'm going to jump ahead just to knock out Raymond Eckhart's question about pre-emergent herbicides and whether they're effective to manage the seed banks for these annual invasives like Mile a Minute or Japanese stilt grass.
Pre-emergence will work. They'll work well, but they have a downside of suppressing native and the natural herbaceous stuff and other native seeds that are in the seed bank, which is kind of what you want to promote. The pre-emergent herbicides aren't specific to, like, say, grasses or something like that. They'll suppress everything.
Yeah.
But they will work, and in some cases, if it's like totally infested with stilt grass or mile a minute, might be worth a shot. But you will have the effect of suppressing native stuff. So.
Mhm. Christine, I'm not going to try your last name. I'm sorry. Christine asks, is the Weed Warrior program in the Eastern Shore?
I don't believe so. I haven't heard of one. I might be wrong. We should network more than we do, but as far as I know, there's one in Montgomery County, Carroll County. There's one starting in the Howard, Baltimore City, Baltimore County starting up, and Anne Arundel and Prince George's. I haven't heard of anything in any other counties in the state, so it's not, which is not to say they're not there. But generally, I would hear somebody starting up.
Great. Carolyn Knight asks, are there other vines that are harmful to trees? And there's some vines okay that can be left in place.
Oh, excellent question. Pretty much any of the woody vines you see, and this includes Asian bittersweet or Oriental bittersweet, Japanese or Chinese wisteria, Japanese honeysuckle. There's also one called Porcelain Berry, which looks kind of like a grapevine. It has multicolored berries. Those are all bad actors, and they will kill trees. And you'll notice that they wrap around the trees and they'll strangle trees. What they specifically do is they suppress the natural regeneration that's necessary for a healthy forest. You have to have seedlings and saplings coming up to replace that overstory when it finally succumbs to whatever happens. These are like, they're invasive. Nori bittersweet in the last 20 years has just gone crazy. Climate change has an effect. These invasives are starting to flourish because of the increased temperatures and stuff like that. But there are native vines. The native grapeviners, with 4 or 5 species of native grapevine. You can tell the native grapevines, because they have a shreddy bark. They're dark brown, and the bark looks like, the bark comes off in shreds. Those are good because they're great for wildlife. And general rule of thumb is you want to keep 5 to 7 grapevines per acre to handle wildlife. Now, if there's too many on one, if you have 5 or 7 growing on one tree, then you have a problem because the weight will take the tree down, in which case you might want to cut them and reduce it to 1. But if there's only one on a tree, make sure you leave it because it's good wildlife habitat. And other vines are Virginia creeper. It's got 5 palm-shaped 5 leaves. And everybody's favorite poison ivy is a native vine. You might want to keep that away from the swimming pool area. Just saying. But it's not poison ivy is the same token is not an endangered plant, so feel free to control it as you need it. So
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a few more questions now. I do want to just be cognizant. We are coming up on the 1 o'clock hour, but if you're okay to stay on and continue answering questions,
yeah, I can say a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to continue. So Matt Argon asks, any suggestions for eradicating a moderate area about 3 by 15 feet of bamboo?
Okay, that's a quite manageable size. The best way to handle bamboo is to cut it down to the ground. You can do it now or well, I'd wait till the fall. It's too hot now. But cut it down and let it resprout. When it gets about 5 to 6 feet tall, or even smaller, let's say 4 feet, anywhere 4 to 6 feet, then spray it with a perhaps a 3% solution of glyphosate, and cover all the leaves. Stems and all. Let that take effect. It'll take week to 10 days for it to start to take effect. Then hit it again, spray it again, and then let it die. Then sometime over the winter, cut it down again and let it sprout again. Now, what should happen by then is if you applied it correctly, you should have killed like 90% of the stalks. You'll still have a few coming up. And what you do is you repeat that process. Cut them, or actually spray them, cut them, let them grow up again, spray them, and repeat. And eventually you'll kill the rhizomes and roots, which are extensive for bamboo. But what you have to do is you have to deplete the nutrients that are in the storage there in the rhizomes, which allows it to keep on resprouting. One of the worst things you can do is try to grub it out. Now that's something that's small, you might be able to do it. But all you need is like one little piece. Leave one little piece in there, so it'll come right back up again. And plus, you have to worry about disturbing the soil, because when you disturb soil like that, there's a seed bank in there that's dormant. You might wake it up another sleeping giant. It might have something else come up. So
great. Next one, somebody asked about Multiflora rose and tree of heaven. I know I've seen some areas in central Maryland with just covered with Multiflora rose. I'm curious, in a state park actually. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Multiflora rose is another one of those bright ideas. Well, they started planting it to make national hedgerows back in the 30s and 40s, and we're dealing with it now. But multiflora rose is kind of tough to kill, but you can pull it out, cut it mechanically. If you have a small enough patch of it, you can keep doing that and deplete it. But part of the best way to control it is right before it's right while it's flowering, is to spray it with a herbicide, or like Roundup, or something with Tricopyr. Tricopyr is a growth regulator that works well on woody plants. It is a woody plant. It has very aggressive roots, and they're hard to kill. You a fun fact here is that a lot of the ornamental roses, like the knockout roses and all the other stuff you buy from the nurseries and box stores, were grafted on in multiflora rose roots, because they're so hardy, they'll keep on growing. So if you, I've seen it in people's gardens where they had a winter, have a harsh winter to kill the top of the plant off, and it doesn't kill the roots. So then you have multiflora rows coming off. So it's everywhere. But it's another thing you have to do, be persistent. It might, and again, you have seeds in the seed bank, so it'll be another 5 to 7 years before you can get rid of all the seed bank. Now, Ailanthus or Tree of Heaven is a special case. It is one of the most difficult plants to control. It's up there with kudzu in terms of how hard it is, because it has a very vigorous sprout response. All you have to do to make it mad is go in there and start hacking on the bark. And you can cut it, and all you want, but it's not you're not going to kill it by cutting it like you can with some woody plants. So you have to use chemicals. Triclopyr works, but how you control Tree of Heaven is to use what's called a basal bark spray. Not spray, but an application, basal bark application, where you take the concentrated ester of it, or oil formulation of it, and your concentration has to be, it should be at least 20%, if not more. 40% is better. And you coat the bottom 18 inches of the tree all the way around it, and just coat it with like a paintbrush or a paint roller or something like that, and let that sink in, absorb into the tree, and that should kill the top and also kill the roots. Do not try to cut it. They used to say use a cut surface, where you would cut it and just coat the surface of the stump. That just starts the sprout response up again. They're not hard to make these things mad, and once you make them mad, they start sprouting. That's about the best way I know how to get rid of it.
Yeah.
And be persistent.
Yeah. Great. I shared a couple of resources from University of Maryland Extension and Penn State. They have a variety of fact sheets and videos on a lot of specific species as well, and as for people to look into and look at. I have heard as well with multiflora rose, it can be a multi-year effort in herbicide. I've heard them with big thickets to mow first and then spray what comes back, so you can access some of these areas because it can get so thick as well.
Yeah. A lot of times they use I've seen fields where it's just covered with it, and they'll just go into with a front end loader and just rip them up and let them sprout again, so you have something smaller to deal with.
Right. Lee Triolo asks, is there an invasive grapevine? I have lots.
What you might have is probably porcelain berry, or Ampelopsis is a genus name. It looks like a grapevine. The leaves look just like grapes, but they're different forms of them. They have all different types of leaf shapes. That's probably porcelain berry.
Great. I've just Googled that myself, and it looks like it has even purple purple seeds that end up, I could see somebody confusing with grapes as well, if you didn't look closely.
It was, from what I heard, it was planted as an ornamental just because of the seeds.
Hmm.
It's another great idea.
Right.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of, Kathleen Overman shared a interesting resource, a good resource on
Mistaken identity.
yeah.
That is a great publication. There's a lot of invasives that have natives that look almost like them. Like sumac is also often mistaken for Atlantis. And there's like 4 or 5 different sumac species that are great wildlife, great for wildlife, and they're natives, and what's not to like.
Right. And Ray Eckert also shared a publication, Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas, and that's put together by National Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
That is a great thing. There's a new version coming out. There's another edition coming out here very shortly. And just ordered 4 boxes of them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're on the 4th edition right now. I guess that'll be the 5th. Great.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Jane Harris asks, are any ideas or resources of plants to put in after removing Japanese stilt grass?
Well, it depends on the habitat. In the woods itself, a lot of times you don't really need a replacement plant if it's just a forested situation. The forest floor will just recover, and you'll get plants come up from that. If it's like it does invade lawns, so then they something like a red clover or something like that would be a good choice there in a lawn situation.
Great. I think I know I've actually tried to introduce some clovers as something after mowing down the stilt grass, putting something in to compete and sort of shade it out in the future. But I have found on year 2 that stilt grass shades back out those clovers, and it actually helps to mow down that stilt grass so that it keeps the clovers alive, at least underneath. Otherwise, I think they would have gotten smothered.
Yeah.
The stilt grass. Yeah, that one's a tough one. It's one I'm battling too. I'm on year 2, and I'm hopeful at some point, like you're saying, I will see them start to decline, but they're back. They're still strong in my area. So
yeah.
Well, great. I think that was all the questions I've got on the list.
Well, I have one last thing to tell everybody is, remember, this is a difficult job to do, and it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the whole. But if you go out to your property and there's a whole acre of invasives everywhere, don't lose hope. Because sometimes it makes me want to go running down the street, screaming at the top of my lungs myself. But try to concentrate on, like, and they'll divide and conquer. Start working on little sections at a time, like maybe this side here, or next to the barn or something like that. Work on a little piece at a time and get that under control, and then move to the next one. If you try to do it all at one time, it's going to get very discouraging.
Yeah, I'm thinking of actually a recommendation from Dave Jackson, formerly with Penn State Extension. He just left, but he recommended the approach of actually starting in the least invaded areas and clearing it out of the where you see it, but hasn't completely taken over, and sort of cleaning up those areas where it's present but not overwhelming, and then working your way back to the areas where that's completely overrun by it.
That's a good method, because it's a lot easier, and you get a sense of accomplishment for one thing. Because if you're concentrating on the bad areas, those nicer areas are starting to get worse. So
yeah,
good point.
Raymond Eckert also shared, he said, anecdotally, in shady areas, clearweed has been touted as a potential way to crowd out Japanese stilt grass. And it looks like he's got a link to Illinois Wildflowers link. Guessing that clearweed must be a native. Yeah,
clearweed is a native. Yeah.
Right.
It might work. I don't know where you get a source of it, though.
There are a lot of I will note there are a lot of native plant nurseries out, and so they might be able to help provide. They might have some of these species available, and that's
possible.
One thing people usually recommend is try to find a seed source from as local a source as possible.
Yes.
If you can find Maryland specific ecotypes, that's great. Or Pennsylvania is not far, but try to stay in the same region as much as possible. Great. Well, I want to say, Jane Harris just shared, Maryland Native Plant Society has great resources on their website, and I think they also have a list of native plant nurseries.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I believe U.S. Fish and Wildlife in their Annapolis office, they maintain a local one too. Great.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Bud. I appreciate it, and I hope this was helpful for everybody who attended. I think we have a survey. When you leave, you will have a poll, I think, that comes up and asks for your feedback on the topic. And again, feel free to write or share any suggested topics you'd like to hear about in future monthly webinars. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Bud.
You're welcome.